This podcast is brought to you by Intel.
Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. Okay, I know you didn't sign up for this, but give me a minute to vent about the Canadian healthcare system. I've recently been bounced around from specialist to specialist, waiting months and months for appointments that often only last a couple of minutes before I'm referred somewhere else. There were years where my family didn't have a family doctor, and my old doctor threw out all my medical records, leaving no trace of decades of my health data. All of this is immensely frustrating, and admittedly very minor compared to the true horror stories that many people have. But the thing is, this experience is hardly unique. In wealthy countries all over the world, doctors are getting squeezed for their time and their attention. In the US, the typical doctor's visit lasts only 7 minutes, and on average, a patient only has 18 seconds to explain their symptoms and their medical history before they're interrupted by their physician. Both of these things are likely contributing to the fact that there are 12 million significant misdiagnoses in America every year. We don't have the same kind of data available here in Canada, but my guess is that we're looking at a very similar picture. The bottom line is that as doctors have gotten busier and their jobs have gotten more demanding, they have less and less time with their patients, and our quality of care is suffering because of it. But Eric Topol thinks there might be a better way. Topol is a cardiologist and one of the most widely cited medical researchers in the world. He's also a bit of a maverick in the medical community, someone known for pushing big, ambitious ideas in a profession that is often quite cautious. And his latest book, Deep Medicine, is no different. In it, he proposes a radical idea that in order for our medical system to become more human, we need to embrace the inhuman in the form of artificial intelligence. You say we're practicing shallow medicine right now. Can we just start with what you mean by that? Because I think that's the norm to a certain degree.
Well, it wasn't always that way, but it has been for some time. That is shallow, meaning that very limited time of a patient with their doctor, often single-digit minutes, and that time is compromised. That is, doctors are clicking away at a keyboard, looking at a screen, not really having face-to-face time. The patient doesn't feel like they're being cared for. The exam may be cursory or not even exist, a physical exam. And also on the clinician side, there's not a lot of reflective thinking, system 2 thinking, if you will, from Danny Kahneman, but rather reflexive system 1 thinking. So every way you look at it, it's fast, it's shallow, and it's not adequate.
You said it always hasn't been like that. When did that change, and why did that happen?
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to know back in the 80s, medicine was different. There was no electronic health record or screens. There was more time allocated for each patient visit. So the relationship with patients was much more intimate and with more trust and presence. It was a special thing where you knew the doctor always had your back. You didn't feel rushed. And the norm was that there was trust, and we have to get that back.
Even just sticking on the time with patient and doctor, I mean, it's remarkable the change. I mean, I can't remember what year it was exactly, but I've heard you describe 30 minutes to an hour average time versus 6 minutes now. I mean, that's just a remarkable transformation of the practice.
Right, and part of this is that, unfortunately, physicians have never been able to stand up on behalf of patients, and they've been squeezed to the hilt, to the point where not even just is the time of the visit compromised greatly, but also there's after-hours time of charting electronically, data clerk work, which has led to a tremendous amount of disenchantment and burnout. So not only the patient's upset, but also doctors and nurses are equally unhappy. So there has to be a solution, and I think there is one.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you reference new technologies like computer screens and electronic healthcare records that were, I guess, initially designed to make the practice more efficient, but have ended up causing some of the degradation in the patient-doctor relationship that you're talking about. So what makes you think AI is going to be different?
Well, the first premise that you had, which is that the technology, the main one being electronic health records, were introduced to make things more efficient, that actually is flawed because it wasn't done for that. It was done for billing purposes. So it was part of the big
So it
business.
depends how we define efficiency, I guess.
Yeah. Efficiency. It wasn't for, better care. It was better capture for billing. And essentially it still is. Now, why is the AI technology going to promote the humanity in medicine and bring back the patient-doctor relationship as it once existed? So the reason that's the case is it has the ability in many different dimensions to first alleviate the data clerk function, bring back face-to-face contact, the gift of time. It also provides for patients autonomy, much more democratization of medical stuff, their data, capturing their data and processing it, interpreting it. And then a bunch of other things that we can get into. But the main point here is that there's many opportunities that here we can harness the AI tools to recreate a medicine that is what it's supposed to be. Why we went into practice of medicine, why patients, what they expect to have the sense that they're being cared for and that we can provide the care that we believe is essential.
I'm interested in that relationship between the introduction of the technology and productivity. And I think there's often a paradox with some of these technologies in that we think they're going to free up all this time to do all these wonderful things, but we end up just doing more of something else. I mean, I certainly feel that in a lot of the technologies that have been introduced into my workflow, whether it be various data processing tools or chat tools, whatever they might be. And how do we distinguish between productivity tools that just make us busier versus ones that actually enable time and deliberation and the things you think we need more of in our system?
Yeah, that's an important point. Let me see if I can try to unpack that. So, if you look at some of these synthetic note capabilities, by synthetic note, I mean the conversation between doctor and patient during a visit.
So this would be a tool that records and transcribes your note taking. Okay.
Right. It's made into a note that is far better than any notes that exist today, but it's beyond that. So, firstly, it has the audio links for the patient to go back to because oftentimes what's discussed people forget or they don't really understand. So they have that transcript and the audio links to listen, and it's in their at their level of language and education, culture, or whatever. Now that's just the beginning of it because this synthetic note then goes ahead and schedules the follow-up appointments, does pre-authorization for insurance companies, which is an issue here in the US, a big issue. It does tests and procedures that need to be set up, and it even nudges the patient about the things that were discussed during the visit. So that digitized note, not the electronic health record, but rather the AI, natural language processing, can serve as it's already in places where it's widely being used. The average is 3 hours reduction of data clerk work. And there's no keyboard, there's no screen because you're now face to face with the patient. So this is just the immediate reward of just getting better communication in that time together. The other part of your question is, well, if we're more efficient, then aren't the overlords that are fixated on revenue going to say, oh, now you see more patients in any unit time, or read more scans or slides or whatever you're supposed to do? And that's where we have to stand up for that this has been compromised to such a terrible extent that we can't let that happen. This is our big chance. This is it.
I mean, it sounds to a certain degree like artists pushing back against generative AI tools, and where we really have sort of human organization pushing back in some way.
Yeah, I mean, this is wanting to use AI, but not letting that be used against clinicians. Because if it does, then we've lost that opportunity to fix. Our biggest problem is, if I had to say, what are the three words? Gift of time. That is, if you spend more time together and listen to patients instead of interrupting them after 8 seconds, so they can't tell their story, they can't express their concerns. Again, part of that shallow thing that you started with. Well, that if we can't get to a point where patients are really expressing their concerns and questions, then we haven't gained anything. And that requires time. And most people that went into medicine on the clinical side, they did that because they really want to provide, great care. And the reason why we have such terrible burnout is they feel they can't do it with the constraints that exist today.
It certainly sounds like that dynamic within the clinic between a patient and a doctor, the ability for that to be transcribed and a whole host of follow-up done potentially in and around that transcription, like that sounds valuable to me. But it feels like the potential of AI might be far broader within the medical
Oh,
system more
yeah.
broadly.
Oh,
And could you give some examples of other ways in which AI is being introduced, and what makes you most excited about this, and where do you see the real potential here?
yeah. Well, this is just a warm up act, Taylor. This is just a beginning. So, well, first of all, I do want to say that my biggest aspiration is to return of the patient-doctor relationship. That is overarching. But the next phase that we're already seeing is alleviation of medical errors in diagnosis. So in the US each year, there's over 12 million serious diagnostic errors. We have 800,000 Americans who are either disabled or dead each year, according to Johns Hopkins, because of serious diagnostic errors. So wouldn't it be nice if we could put a dent in that, like get rid of 800,000 of them? I think it's likely we will. Now, it won't happen as a light switch, but the point is, let's just look at scans for a second. The interpretation of scans can be greatly improved when there's both a clinician, let's say a radiologist, is looking at the image and the AI that's been trained to be very highly accurate. And in fact, the machine has superhuman eyes, digital eyes, things that we can't see, that we will never see. So this is really exciting because not just that, but for example, going through a patient's records and sifting through them very quickly and coming up with the summary of the key issues, the diagnoses, the abnormalities in lab tests, the uncertainties, reviewing the literature for that patient. Things that would take us hours to do can be done in the flash of seconds. So this is another thing that, processing information to help lead to accuracy, that things don't get missed, and making the diagnosis. One other thing just to mention before I forget, if a doctor thinks of the diagnosis within the first 5 minutes of seeing a patient, the accuracy is really very high, 95%. But if a doctor doesn't think of it, it drops off to 20-some%.
What explains that? That's fascinating.
Yeah, because again, this reflective part of thinking, no one has time to think. And the point is, AI can provide a differential diagnosis that's as good as expert clinicians. The idea that you have this immediate second opinion of what the diagnosis could be, this is going to help, because it's just basically filling in some blanks that were missed during the reflexive system one thinking.
I've got so many things to ask on there. I mean, if where human error is the worst is that longer deliberative thinking after the fact on what presumably are the really tough problems, are the AI also better at that? Or is that a human trait to be able to think through those kinds of problems?
Well, it's both, but the reason why we get stuck is because of, again, this time is compromised. And you don't ever really get the time to, let's say, I'm going to review the literature. Maybe there's another diagnosis I should be considering. So this is where the AI kicks in at a level that's just, extraordinary. So summarizing the data, coming up with a differential is not making the diagnosis per se. And I can't emphasize enough with you that it's still the physician that's in charge here, in the loop, but getting inputs from the large language models, it's helpful.
So you hear the example of radiology scans. What do you see the role of the human in that being? So if traditionally a radiologist would analyze, I don't know, 50 to 100 images a day, they're good at some things, but not others. When you add AI that has this superhuman ability, image recognition ability, what's the interplay there between the radiologist and the AI?
We have to just fess up that AI models, and I'm going to get into in a moment, that it's not just seeing what we think we can see, but well beyond that, superseding what we'll ever see. Like, for example, when a radiologist looks at a chest x-ray, they're not thinking about making the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, okay? That's not on there. And in fact, if you're the radiologist, you get a requisition while you're doing the chest x-ray is checking for pneumonia, let's say. Well, you may not be looking at the bottom of the chest x-ray to see if there's some abnormality, but the AI says, something wrong here with the pancreas. Just an example.
Why can't humans do that? Is that a processing capacity issue or a...
Well, no. I don't want to say that these things don't get picked up, but they don't get picked up as frequently and with as much accuracy, just because the human workload is so extraordinary to radiologists that they don't have enough. It's again this time. If you gave them enough time, they'd probably pick it up, but they have each day, they have a full list of tasks to get through, and they just aren't going to spend time looking for things that weren't being, why the scans were ordered in the first place.
Okay, so we've been talking about how AI will give doctors more time with patients and improve diagnostic accuracy. But your book also covers something you call medical forecasting, which seems like it could be pretty transformative. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
So this is like, we've already kind of blown through, in a way, these first few phases I've been talking about, but the next big one is forecasting. And what I mean by that is, so AI, multimodal AI, has led to a weather forecasting that's extraordinary. It's called GraphCast. Most people will say, oh, the weather forecasts are not that great. Well, guess what? They're going to be really great because they've now been essentially trained via AI with, years worth of data at any locale. Now, for medicine, it's similar. There's all these layers of a human being, not what's in their electronic health record, but their genome, their gut microbiome, their environment, their physiology through sensors, all their lab results, and on, all these layers of data. So the point being now that, let's say, if we just take Alzheimer's, for example, there's a biomarker for Alzheimer's that picks up accumulation of amyloid in the brain very early. And there are genes that put you at risk for Alzheimer's. So you could tell 20 years before even the start of Alzheimer's that someone was at very high risk. And you could track that now during those 20 years to try to prevent it from ever happening. And we're starting to have ways to do that now we never had before. So for serious illnesses like cancer, cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and things like this, we're having a potential medical forecasting through multimodal AI, defining high-risk people, tracking them, determining the time of intervention. I mean, it's really exciting. And, we're at the very early stages of using this, but we're going to reboot our whole approach to preventing. And I can't emphasize enough that all these years, we've had big talk about preventing illness. serious illness. And we don't do very well at that.
Do you find in your practice that people are hesitant to learn about future risk if the preventative tools or the potential cures aren't as certain?
Yes, so if it isn't actionable, then it's no good. Nobody wants us to say, oh, I'm doomed and I can't do anything about it. They only want to know if they can prevent that serious condition. So that's what's, I think it's not just about the forecast, it's also about the actionability.
This podcast is brought to you by Intel.
What about the other side of this spectrum? Where do you see AI or humans being substantially better than AI? Where's our comparative advantage?
Well, there's some surprises there, Taylor. So, first of all, you want to bring back the human bond in medicine. I mean, if there's one thing that's essential, that's it. And AI will never be able to do that. However, the big surprise was how good AI could promote empathy and better communication. So if we go back to that synthetic note and then say, critique the doctor, and you say, you take the note and he says to the doctor, why did you interrupt Mrs. Jones after 9 seconds? She never got to express her concern. Why didn't you ask about this? So the point being is that the AI can coach the doctor to be a better communicator and more empathetic. And that's been shown now through several studies. I never would have guessed that. AI doesn't know what empathy is, but basically it's promoting it by knowing good language. So here again, we want to be as great a communicator and empathic as possible, and for the patient to know that this doctor has your back.
Do you think this will mean we'll need to rethink what it actually means to be a doctor?
Absolutely. Right now, the criteria for medical school admission is that you have very high grades and you have a very good score on your medical college admission test. But there's nothing about, are you a good interpersonal skills? Do you care about people? That sort of thing. So in the future, we don't need brainiacs so much. We need people that obviously have good judgment and are curious, that they want to read and keep up with their field and good reasoning power. Oh, yeah, sure. But knowing all what's in the medical literature and all the things that we used to memorize in medical
and rote
school.
retention and
Yeah, we don't need that anymore. That's where we can lean on machines and AI.
I mean, whenever I spend time in hospitals, I'm, like most people, blown away by the empathetic capacity of nurses,
Yeah.
who really do the heavy lifting of the human relationships in the medical system. And I wonder if that's more what we're looking for, is what we've been training nurses to be. And the characteristics that of people who've been attracted to nursing might be more what we need in our system.
I agree with you. I think by and large, you're going to find that quality exemplified in nurses. And I actually think in physicians, they are there. They're latent. They've been suppressed. They were there in the beginning, but they've been unfortunately
Beaten out of them by the system.
beaten out. Yeah, they've become calloused. And
I mean, you mentioned in your book that there's a study that medical students perform better after spending time in museums and art galleries. What's going on there? Is that related to this?
yeah, that's a really good point you're making. This study, which is interesting because it's being reflective. It's spending time thinking about, what you're seeing in a museum, which is what we don't get to do enough. When you are really trying to get deeper in your thoughts and trying to be, more introspective, this is what we need in the care of patients.
So you write about different alternatives here, that this new capacities could make things far better or worse. What are you concerned about here, and what path could come from this if we're not careful?
Well, I touched on that earlier. I am worried that the efficiency that you mentioned could actually make things worse if that's possible. Because here in the US, most health systems are run by administrators. They're not run by clinicians. And their charge is to bring in more revenue. So this is really going to be a major tension going forward, because if you start to realize that, for example, right now at Emory Health System in Atlanta, the physician that's in charge of the information technology, HIT, he's getting love letters from his doctors about they're saving, hours a day because of these synthetic notes. Now, I've never heard of such a thing. I mean, I've never heard of the IT leader getting love notes. Now, here's the problem. As that gets more pervasive, then the administrator say, oh, wow, they have all these extra hours a day. I'm going to assign them more patients to see in unit time. We can't let that happen. This is a turning point in medicine. So if we don't stand up and say to these overlords, no, the gig's up. This is about care of patients. And, we've never stood up as a physician community. We've just let this happen. All these things that happen over these, 30, 40 years, we just let it slide. And this is a time that that's not going to work, because we may not get another chance like this.
How do you see us avoiding that? And what do you think doctors should be doing there to push back against this?
Well, I wrote an article in the New Yorker a few years ago about, I wouldn't want to call them unions, but it's kind of like that. We have a lot of gravitas together. We could stand up to that and say, no, we're not going to have 15-minute slots and actually have, 6 or 7 minutes with patients. There was an experiment that was done at Geisinger Health System in Pennsylvania, where, interestingly, they gave every patient clinic visit 40 minutes, and you couldn't leave the room, the doctor or the patient, before 40 minutes. That was the experiment. And what was amazing is the patients and the doctors loved it. They loved it, both. The thought was, oh, well, the doctors are going to, just go crazy because they're used to 6 or 7 minutes. Well, it turns out there was all this bonding that took place, but of course it was abandoned because it wasn't lucrative financially, right? So we got to get back to that, and AI can help us. But if we miss this opportunity, I don't know when we're going to see another one like this again.
So it strikes me that for a while you've been a pretty forward-looking person in what is generally a pretty cautious profession. Your first book was The Creative Destruction of Medicine. Your new book was about AI and the adoption of AI and what it means to be a doctor. I mean, these are pretty foundational critiques and also projections of where your field is going. I'm wondering how your community has reacted to this. Like, how are you viewed within the medical community?
Well, it never has gone over exceptionally well, especially when the first book, as you mentioned, when you call it creative destruction, that already is kind of really challenging the status quo in medicine. The second book, The Patient Will See You Now, we're still not ready for that, which is giving patients more charge, because doctors are, control freaks, and they don't like to yield, particularly older docs like me. They don't like to yield control to patients, and that's what we need to do in the digital world that we live in. The AI book was interesting because here, for the first time, there was a larger segment of the medical community that said, aha, maybe this can really help us, because things are getting pretty desperate. We still are in a wait and see. There's many pieces that are not developed as they should, but hopefully we're going to get there.
So you feel like the profession is becoming more forward-looking?
I hope so. I mean, it's hard to know. There's still lots of skepticism, and that's justified without compelling evidence. But I think the hope, the desperation, if you will, I mean, as you know, there's been a lot of physicians that have just given up, early retirement, or just quit and left the profession, and nurses too. And so we need a rescue plan. We need something to make lives better, and also for patients. They're disenchanted equally. So if there's another idea out there that can get us to where we need to go, I'm very anxious to hear it. I don't know of it.
You mentioned empowering patients, and there seems to have been this dynamic between where doctors felt they needed to control information in order to protect patients, that information about the patient was better held in the hands of doctors than in patients. And I wonder if AI kind of flips that a little bit, where patients will now have more power themselves to understand data about themselves. And is that another potential here?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because this is really a pet peeve of mine, which is it's our data as patients. We should own the data. It's ours. And the medical community is just not letting go of that data. It's a problem, serious problem. So my sense is that until that happens, patients can't have the charge. Like, for example, we rely a lot on portals, and that gives you only kind of the de minimis of about your record. It doesn't give you the raw images. It doesn't give you, a lot of what's in there. The problem is all that should be yours. And if you have AI models that can process your data and you have inadequate, incomplete inputs, it's only going to do a job that's inadequate. So this is a real issue, the unwillingness to let go, to give patients all their data, which is, I believe it should be a civil right to have all your data. We aren't doing this. We should be doing it. And that's also getting prepared for the AI world we're going to be living in, which is inevitable.
Just to close here, you write that our current system is focused on curing and not healing. What does it mean to build a system or rebuild a medical system that is focused on healing?
Well, I think healing comes from that human bond. The doctor really cares about me, and she or he is doing everything they can to get me to be better. I may not be cured, but I'm going to get over this, whatever it is, or I'm going to have a much better chance of surviving and without suffering, whatever it is. So we've got to do much better. It's a human trait. Cures are they're rarefied, true cures in medicine. There's just not many of them. But healing, that's what should be the norm. But it isn't something that happens with you give somebody a pill. The healing happens between people. It's something that's often subconscious, subliminal, but it's essential, because that's something AI will never do that we can do. I hope we can get back to that.
Machines Like Us is produced by Paradigms in collaboration with the Globe and Mail. The show is produced by Mitchell Stewart. Our associate producer is Sequoia Kim. Executive producers are Kathleen Goldhar and James Millward. Our theme song is by Chris Kelly. A special thanks to Matt Frainer and the team at the Globe and Mail. If you liked the interview you just heard, please subscribe or leave a rating or a comment. It really helps us get the show to as many people as possible.